Hey guys, tonight we're heading somewhere very dry, very hot, and very papery. You're standing barefoot on the edge of ancient Egypt, where the sun isn't so much shining as pressing down on you, like an angry god with a personal vendetta. The kind of afternoon where your eyelids feel sunburned, and your sweat is the only thing keeping your linen tunic from turning into a stiff scroll itself. Here, in a world before books, before notebooks, before post-its and printer jams, there's only one thing to write on and someone has to make it. That someone is you. You're not a priest, not a pharaoh, not even a fancy scribe. You're a papyrus worker. And right now, your only job is to somehow not evaporate in the next 2 hours. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're still conscious, let me know your local time and where you're listening from in the comments. Maybe we'll find out which part of the world yawns loudest. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. The afternoon is quiet. Not peaceful, just stubbornly quiet. The sort of stillness that makes you suspicious. The kind that tells you even the river is taking a break. The Nile, that sacred lifeline of the entire country, lies thick and heavy like oil under the sun. No breeze, no ripples, not even a heron bold enough to flap it. You sit hunched near a mud brick wall, one hand shielding your eyes, the other clutching a sweat-slicked reed basket full of half-dried papyrus. There's a fly determined to win a staring contest with your nose. You lose. The air smells of baked stone, wet fiber, and distant dung. Somewhere beyond the palm groves, a donkey brays like it's the last soul left in Thebes. You squint toward the water, hoping for the tiniest breeze. Nothing. You're on your own. This is a windless afternoon. The very worst kind for papyrus work. Why? Because windless afternoons mean you can't dry the new sheets. And if you can't dry the new sheets, your backlog piles up. Your neighbors start whispering about your lazy streak. And worst of all, you have to talk to your coworkers, like Medjay, who's already humming that funeral hymn again for the 5th time. Today, you stretch your legs across the sandstone courtyard and stare up at the reed canopy overhead. It doesn't offer shade so much as a polite suggestion of shade. You wonder how long it would take to bake bread on your own shoulder. Probably less time than it'll take to finish today's order. Historically speaking, most people associate papyrus with scrolls in libraries, scribes in white linen robes, and bored priests documenting every pigeon sacrifice ever performed. But historians still argue whether the real heroes of the papyrus trade weren't the quiet, sweaty folks like you hidden from scrolls, but smeared into the fibers of every sheet. A mainstream historical fact, papyrus sheets were the go-to medium for writing in ancient Egypt long before parchment, long before paper, made from Cyprus papyrus, a water-loving reed that once grew thick along the Nile Delta. These sheets were surprisingly durable. The trick, a meticulous process of slicing, layering, pressing, and drying, all by hand. All under this blistering sun, the fringe tidbit. Some workers believed that if a papyrus sheet dried on a perfectly still day, with no wind at all, it would absorb the silence of the gods, which meant it was better for spells, poems, or love letters, especially if you were trying to win back a wife who'd moved 3 doors down and was now dating a man who traded in beer jugs. You don't speak from personal experience. Mostly, you stand, stretch, and feel the ache in your lower back. The ache that tells you you've spent too many afternoons squatting by riverbanks. Your hands are stained green from sap. Your fingers carry tiny cuts you stopped counting last week. You glance at the drying racks and sigh. The sheets from this morning are still damp, not wet. Just damp enough to curl, bubble, and ruin your reputation if delivered that way. Medjay shuffles over with a cracked water jug and 2 cups carved from split gourds. You take one. It tastes like warm Nile and minerals, which is to say, absolutely terrible. But it's wet, and that's all that matters. You hear about Seti's cousin. Medjay says, out of nowhere. You nod. Because it's too hot to talk. Got stepped on by a hippo. You raise an eyebrow. He lived. Now you really raise an eyebrow. He married her. You choke slightly. Medjay grins and wanders off, probably to invent more horrifying gossip. You return to your post, flicking away a beetle trying to claim squatter's rights on your left calf. You run your fingers across yesterday's batch of papyrus, feeling for ridges, bubbles, or invisible damp patches that could doom the scroll before it ever sees a scribe's hand. You find 3 imperfections in the first sheet alone. You sigh and set it aside for the fire pit. A prayer to Thoth, the god of writing, murmurs through your lips without much conviction. You don't expect divine help. You'd settle for a breeze. The sky begins to shift toward late afternoon, not cooler, just less aggressive. You gather your tools, dull knives, sandstone rollers, a handful of half-finished sheets. Work must continue. Even if the gods are clearly napping, a sudden gust teases the edge of the canopy. Your skin pricks. Could it be wind? Nope. Just a pelican, flapping past with the urgency of someone late to a fish funeral. You sit back down. Maybe tomorrow will be windier. Maybe tomorrow the sheets will dry right. Maybe tomorrow Medjay will run out of hippo stories. Or maybe tomorrow's just another afternoon exactly like this one. You shuffle down the slope toward the riverbank, basket creaking against your hip as the heat presses lower on your shoulders like a persistent uncle who doesn't understand personal space. The Nile glints in that sickly midday way, beautiful. Yes, but in the same way a cobra is beautiful. It dares you to get comfortable. The reeds wait for you, clustered thick like gossiping ants. Papyrus plants, your real coworkers, you know. Their shapes by heart the triangle stalks, bright green and sturdy, rising tall from the silty muck. They smell slightly sweet, slightly damp, and slightly like your childhood. Not in a nostalgic way, more like, why am I still doing this after 12 years kind of way? You wade ankle deep into the edge of the water, where your toes sink into something soft and ancient. It's either blessed sediment or the ghost of last week's sandals. You crouch, choosing the straightest, plumpest stalks with practiced fingers, snapping them close to the root with a tug and twist. Every good papyrus sheet begins with a judgment call. Too thin, and the fibers won't hold. Too old, and the inner pulp turns bitter and brittle. But just right. It sings under your knife. Or maybe that's Medjay again. He's nearby, slapping at flies and swearing softly at a frog that just leapt into his basket. You pretend not to hear the swearing, partly because it's more creative than usual, and partly because you're trying to focus on the next stalk. You bend, you pull, you breathe in humid air that smells like water and age, and the occasional rotten fish. A mainstream historical fact. Papyrus wasn't just a writing material, it was the lifeblood of Egypt's administrative machine. It documented taxes, temple donations, birth records, legal disputes, harvest counts, and letters home from soldiers posted near Nubia who really missed their cats. The entire country ran on papyrus, and papyrus ran on afternoons like this, a fringe tidbit. The Nile's annual flooding, the very thing that made the papyrus plant thrive, was believed to be caused by the tears of the goddess Isis mourning her dead husband Osiris. So in a weird way, every time you cut a stalk, you're harvesting grief. You don't like to think about that too much when the reed juice splashes your chest. You drag your bundle to the shore, where it joins a pile already taller than a child's hope. You sit and peel, strip by strip. There's a technique to it, simple, but finicky. You cut near the top and then pull downward, shaving off the green outer skin to reveal the pale, pulpy core. The inner part, soft and sponge-like, is what you want. What the scribes want. What the gods, allegedly, write on when they're bored. The process is sticky, the sap oozes fast, making your fingers shine in the sunlight. It's satisfying at first, then annoying. The more you peel, the more your hands resemble a lizard shedding in reverse. You wipe them on your tunic, smearing pale green streaks that will never quite wash out. You glance at the horizon. Nothing moves, save the heat. Shimmers pretending to be something interesting. There's a child nearby yelling at a duck. The duck wins. Remember when this river was full of fish? Medjay grunts, plopping beside you. Now, you're lucky if the water doesn't steal your foot. You nod, mostly because it's true. Historians still argue whether papyrus makers were considered skilled artisans or just convenient labor. On the one hand, no temple operated without them. On the other, you've never once been invited to the scribe dinners, not even when you brought honey cakes. You switch hands and continue stripping. The fibers squeak as they separate. You hear Medjay start humming again, something about embalming oil and lost dogs, and you almost throw a stalk at him. Almost. Your pile grows, dozens of pale inner cores, all lined up like sleepy snakes. You'll cut these into strips soon, long flat ribbons to layer into sheets. But for now, you rest. You lean back against the rocks, close your eyes, and let your mind drift. You picture the grand library at Heliopolis, scrolls stacked high like spirals of memory. You imagine one of your sheets ending up there, maybe carrying a new hymn, maybe a law, maybe a recipe for fig stew. Doesn't matter. Something that survives. There's a buzzing in your ear. You swat, miss, swat again, and finally, strike something solid. You hope it wasn't sacred. Beside you, Medjay snores. You look at the bundle of reeds. Still so much to go. You wonder not for the first time what it would be like to just float away downriver. Let the current carry you past the city walls, past the fishermen, past the crocodiles with their 1,000-yard stares, and on toward the delta where papyrus grows wild, and nobody asks for tax records. But then you remember, someone has to make the sheets, and that someone, unfortunately, is still you. The pile of peeled papyrus cores rests beside you, sticky and pale, glistening in the heat like sunburnt celery. You drag them under the shade of a half-leaning palm and sit cross-legged on the flattened ground, bronze knife in hand. It's time to slice. The air is still too quiet. You can hear everything: the scratch of a beetle across a stone, the faint giggle of a girl washing clothes downriver, the unsettling plop of something larger than you want to identify slipping into the water. Your blade catches the light, dull but familiar, worn just right from 100 previous afternoons like this. You grip the first core and begin. Long wise cuts, steady and even. You're making ribbons, flat strips from the inside of the plant. Thin as your patience and hopefully much straighter. It's harder than it looks. The stalks resist you. Some splinter. Others curve away from the knife like they're mocking your form. Your hands cramp. Sap slicks the handle. You pause to rub your palms on your tunic, again adding to the fine abstract art forming on your chest. This, you think, is not what the gods had in mind when they invented civilization. A mainstream historical fact. The inner pith of the papyrus plant was sliced into strips typically 1 to 2 centimeters wide, then laid side by side to form a base layer. On top of that, another set of strips would be laid crosswise, creating a kind of proto-grid that would eventually bind together with pressure and time. It's simple in theory. In practice, it requires a sort of low-grade madness and the patience of someone already resigned to eternal sunburn. The fringe tidbit. Some ancient workshops believe that singing while cutting improved the strength of the fibers. Not just any song, specific verses to honor Thoth, god of wisdom and writing. You've tried it. Once. You got 2 verses in before your neighbor accused you of summoning a ghost camel. You haven't tried since. You press on, strip after strip. You sort them into neat stacks by size. Though you suspect no one notices but you, Medjay certainly doesn't. He's already under a tree, munching on what might be a date or might be yesterday's fig. Either way, he's not slicing. You steal a glance at the sun. It's dipping now, slightly, enough to fool you into thinking you're almost done. But there are still 3 cores to go. You begin humming softly, not the old chant, but something you made up a few summers ago when the flies were worse than usual. It helps. A little. The strips are sticky. They curl at the ends. Some break. Some fall into the dirt and pick up tiny grains of sand that you'll have to brush off later or risk handing a priest a scroll full of invisible crunch. Historians still argue whether the slicing process was performed only by certain castes of laborers or if it was a more flexible job anyone could learn. Some records suggest young apprentices were trained in slicing first before learning the crosshatch, before pressing, before drying. Others claim it was all just inherited boredom passed from parent to child. Like sweaty heirlooms, you finish the last core, hand sore, back aching, and lay your strips out on a woven reed mat to dry slightly. Not fully, just enough to stop them from sticking to your fingers like glue. You run your thumb over one of them. Smooth. Not perfect. There's a bend near one end, like it flinched halfway through the slicing. You sigh. Maybe it'll flatten under the press. Maybe it won't. You'll find out soon enough. Medjay wanders over. How many this time? 73, you mutter. He whistles low. 73 prayers to the wind gods. Then, you both chuckle. In that exhausted way only people in the same hot misery can. He drops down beside you, chewing thoughtfully. You ever wonder who actually reads these scrolls? All the time. And I hope it's someone kind. Someone who doesn't smear their ink. Or someone who doesn't notice the beetle imprint. You laugh. It's true. Last month, a small scarab embedded itself in a nearly finished sheet. You swore, scraped, prayed, and pressed again. It left behind a ghostly oval, and the tax scribe who received it thought it was a divine omen. Raised your sheet price. You've considered launching a beetle-based business ever since. The strips are ready. Not dry, but dry enough. You'll start the cross-hatching next, but not now. Now is for sitting, for watching the golden afternoon slide toward dusk, for letting your hands rest on your knees and pretending just for a moment that you're not covered in plant guts and river sweat. There's something poetic in it. Maybe, or maybe that's heat stroke. You squint up at the sky and imagine Thoth himself, scratching your name into a cosmic scroll for being just slightly less lazy than Medjay. The wind shifts, barely, but it's there. You close your eyes and breathe. Tomorrow, the scrolls begin to take shape. But tonight, the peeling is done. You wake before dawn, not because you want to, but because a beetle has crawled across your nose and left behind what you hope is just dirt. You wipe your face on your forearm and sit up slowly, spine creaking like a poorly maintained temple door. The air is still cool, not quite crisp, but blessedly bearable. This is the golden window, before the heat crashes down, before the flies hold meetings on your neck. Time to mash. You shuffle toward the flat workspace by the fire pit, where the previous day's strips lie curled and stiff like tiny scrolls of potential. You gather them up, stack them by size, and choose a flat slab of sandstone worn smooth by years of sticky labor. The pounding rock lies beside it, an oblong chunk, cracked at one end, perfectly sized for bruising both papyrus and spirit. You lay down your first strip, another across it, forming a cross, and then another, then another. Soon you have a rough mat of plant skin laid out like a checkerboard with ambition. And then comes the fun part, beating it senseless. With your sandstone roller in hand, you press and pound rhythmically, methodically, as juice splatters in every direction. It's satisfying in a way primitive, almost like turning swamp weeds into culture. You can almost hear some old court poet praising your efforts in metaphor. More realistically, you just hope this sheet doesn't end up looking like soggy laundry. A mainstream historical fact. Papyrus pulp contains natural glue-like substances, polysaccharides, to be precise, that allow the layers to bond together without any added adhesive. This miracle of nature was why the Egyptians didn't need paste, just pressure, patience, and enough sunlight to rival a minor solar deity. Fringe tidbit. Some workshops added fermented goose bile to the mixture, believing it made the sheets more truthful, as in, less likely to carry lies. Whether this worked or just added an unforgettable odor, no one really knows. You'd rather not find out. Your forearms start to burn. You shift positions. Roll with the heel of your palm. Then press again with the stone. One strip peels up at the corner, too dry. You tuck it back down, muttering a curse so old even the flies raise an eyebrow. You glance over to where Medjay is supposed to be helping. He's there, yes, lying on his side, singing a love song to a lump of clay shaped vaguely like a duck. Do you ever press your own sheets? You ask. I did, he says without opening his eyes. But they rejected me. Said I lacked depth. You roll your eyes so hard your neck pops. It's oddly satisfying. As the juice seeps from the plant fibers, your hands turn pale green again. You know this color intimately. Now the shade of not quite success. You work your way through 5 sheets before the sun fully climbs above the horizon. And by then, your arms feel like they've been crushed under one of those giant statues near Memphis. Historians still argue whether these early pressing techniques were purely manual or sometimes supplemented with primitive wooden tools. Some unearthed fragments suggest attempts at lever-based contraptions, awkward scaffolds where stones hung from ropes to press multiple sheets at once. But there's no evidence those ever replaced the stone and sweat method. You wish they had? You really do. After the pounding comes the arranging. You line the wet mats on a woven screen tilted just enough to drain. The water runs off slowly, carrying pulp residue with it, forming tiny rivers that carve new hieroglyphs into the dirt. You inspect the texture with your fingertips, checking for bumps, gaps, betrayal. One mat feels promising, smooth, even. You nod once, the tiniest nod of a master to their temporary triumph. The sun grows aggressive now. You squint toward the storage hut and consider sneaking away for a sip of sour beer. But the thought of Medjay composing a new poem about your tactical retreat keeps you anchored. He joins you eventually, sort of. He picks up a roller, presses down on one mat with the enthusiasm of a cat needing a pillow, then sighs loudly. This one's got air pockets. That's your fault. Unlikely. I blame the frogs. You snort. You always blame the frogs. Because they're always plotting. You let it go. If frogs were plotting, they'd probably do a better job than the current overseer, who still owes you 3 days' wages and insists the temple needs more scrolls about wheat. As noon approaches, you place each mashed sheet between layers of linen cloth, stacking them carefully under a large flat stone. The weight will stay there for 2 or 3 days depending on the weather, the humidity, and whether or not Medjay sits on it again by accident. You pause to stretch your back. The day's work has only begun, and already, your shoulders ache, your arms itch, and your brain begins whispering fantasies of fishing for a living. But fishing means boats, and boats mean swimming, and swimming means crocodiles. So, Papyrus it is. As you lay the final stone atop the stack, you whisper a tiny prayer not to Thoth, not to Isis, but to the wind, just a breeze, just enough to dry tomorrow's sheets without curling the corners or attracting mold. The gods don't answer, but one of the frogs does, loudly, and somewhere nearby, Medjay claps. The worst thing about windless afternoons isn't the sweat, or the silence, or the way your knees stick to the stone bench like overcooked barley. It's the waiting. You sit beside the drying rack, fanning a newly pressed papyrus sheet with the corner of your tunic like a desperate pigeon. It flops with all the effectiveness of a soggy flag. The sun bakes down. The sheet barely twitches. Wind is the unsung hero of papyrus making. Not too strong, heavens no. That would curl the edges and scatter the strips like holy confetti. But just enough to keep the air moving, to lift the heat gently from the surface, to whisper the moisture away one grain at a time. Today, the gods have decided to hold their breath. You glance at the rack. A row of freshly pressed sheets glistens in the midday light, each one flat and hopeful, and absolutely doomed if they don't dry properly, if they stay damp. The fibers buckle, mold creeps in, the scrolls crinkle. You've lost entire weeks to humidity, whole shipments tossed into the fire pit like failed oaths. You flip one sheet over, gently, the back's still clammy. The way a fish feels just before it starts to smell like regret, you sigh and fan harder. A mainstream historical fact. Drying papyrus was a critical step in production, and the climate of ancient Egypt made the process viable. The combination of dry air, consistent sun, and occasional wind created a natural kiln for the sheets, one that no northern climate could replicate. When papyrus making spread beyond Egypt, it never quite thrived the same way. The weather wasn't invested. Fringe tidbit. Some papyrus workers wore amulets with miniature wind symbols, tiny copper fans, carved feathers, even beetle wings hoping to entice a breeze. You've worn one for years. It's never worked. But you're too afraid to stop wearing it, just in case. Medjay joins you, carrying a reed fan the size of a small crocodile. He waves it once, twice. The sheet flutters faintly, more from sarcasm than science. You ever think maybe we're the only ones doing this the right way? He asks, right way. Yeah? No slaves, no shortcuts. Just 2 guys and a lot of bad decisions. You nod. Mostly bad decisions. He sits beside you and fans his face instead. You roll your eyes. Drying it takes hours. On a breezy day, maybe less. But on afternoons like this, the sun cooks the stones while the air sits like soup in your lungs. Time warps. 5 minutes feel like 50. You start imagining what life would be like if you just didn't make papyrus anymore. Maybe you could train ducks, or brew beer, or become one of those mysterious temple musicians who only seem to appear at festivals, drenched in oil and mystery. But you know better. Historians still argue whether papyrus drying was a sacred process or just another domestic chore. Some texts refer to it with reverence, the sun's blessing on words yet spoken. Others describe it with more indifference. Place flat. Wait, don't mess it up. You're pretty sure the truth lies somewhere in the middle. Sacred, but only if the results were good. You lean forward and sniff the nearest sheet. Still damp, but not disastrously so. You fan harder, your arm beginning to tremble. You imagine yourself years from now. One muscular arm from all the fanning, the other weak and floppy from neglect. A man of asymmetry, a monument to airlessness. Medjay starts whistling. Please don't, you mutter. I whistle for wind, he insists. You whistle like a dying bird. Birds know wind better than we do. You don't dignify that with a response. Instead, you take the sheet and hold it up to the sun, angling it just right. The fibers catch the light, the crosshatch pattern shimmering faintly. It's decent, not perfect, but maybe good enough. You flip another, then another. Some are curling at the corners. You press them flat with a flat palm, whispering empty threats. Two children run past, shouting about crocodiles and gods. One kicks up dust dangerously close to the rack, and you shout after them with a string of curses that somehow manages to rhyme. Medjay claps in approval. Add that one to the hymn book. He says, you don't laugh, but you do smirk. The light begins to shift. The sun's arc lowers, finally relenting a little, shadows creeping back across the yard. The air is still hot, but it moves, just barely, enough to lift a corner of your tunic, enough to make a palm frond sigh. You hold your breath. One sheet flutters, then another. Wind, real wind. You and Medjay both freeze, afraid that moving will scare it off, but it lingers. A soft current. Slow and steady, you lean into it, lifting your fan just to guide it across the sheets. You can already feel the moisture lifting, the stickiness fading, and you breathe. It'll still take another hour, maybe two, but the worst is over. The scrolls will dry, the work will hold, and tomorrow, the writing begins. But for now, you sit, fan resting on your knee, face turned slightly toward the breeze like a man in love. Even Medjay stops talking. And for a moment, in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of nothing, you feel like you've done something that matters. The next morning starts with that quiet kind of satisfaction, like peeling a fig just right, or finally digging the last bit of sand out of your ear. You lift one of the dried sheets off the rack with the reverence of someone handling a baby bird. It's light, crisp, smells faintly like sun-warmed swamp. And something else, something almost sweet. Victory. Maybe you run your hand across it. Smooth, not perfect. There's a slight bubble near the edge, but good enough to pass. Maybe even impress. You stack it with care. Not too tight, not too loose. Every sheet is its own gamble. You don't tempt fate by rushing. Medjay strolls by holding a still damp sheet like it's a wet sock. This one smells like onions and bad decisions, he mutters. That's because you pressed it upside down. You reply, not looking up. He scowls. You're making that up. You raise an eyebrow. Am I? He looks at the sheet again. Maybe. You move to the next sheet. Lifting it slowly, it resists slightly. Sticking to the linen cloth it dried on. You pause. Wiggle your fingers under one edge and gently tease it free. No tearing, no splitting. Just a quiet shh, like the sound of satisfaction itself. A mainstream historical fact. Papyrus sheets, once dried, could be polished with stones or shells to create a smoother writing surface. The smoother the sheet, the better the ink would sit, no bleeding, no blotching. A well-made papyrus was the pride of its maker and the despair of anyone who tried to improve on it centuries later. Romans tried, so did Byzantines, and every time, the Nile smirked and said, nice try. A fringe tidbit. Some papyrus workers swore that the best sheets, those that never curled, never cracked, came from stalks harvested during full moons. You've tested this theory. The only thing it gave you was mosquito bites and a sore neck from squinting at night. You begin sorting the finished stack. The best go on top clean, flat, unmarred by dirt or beetle incidents. The middle stack is decent, usable, honest. The bottom, flawed, maybe warped. or just unlucky. That's the stack that goes to the temples nobody visits or for scribes, so Junior, their names haven't even been engraved yet. Medjay holds up a particularly patchy sheet. This one's got a personality. It also has 3 holes and a worm track. Still better than what we gave the wine merchant last week. That guy wrote a death threat on one of our practice mats. To be fair, the ink held up beautifully. You both laugh. It's a tired kind of laugh. The kind that only people who've sun-dried their self-worth can understand. The sun climbs higher. It glints off the stack of sheets like polished bone. You begin to roll some of them carefully. Mind you, not too tight, not too loose. Like tucking a promise into a scroll, there's a whole art to it. The roll must hold, but not fight the hand that writes. You learned that the hard way when a priest threw one back at you like it was cursed. You pause to admire a particularly good sheet. Perfect crosshatch. No ridges, no curling. You press your thumb to it and feel the texture a whisper, not a bite. This one, you think, might be good enough for poetry, or a letter to a lover, or a list of complaints about temple fees. Historians still argue whether papyrus was ever scented intentionally. Some suggest traders in later centuries rubbed lavender or myrrh into the scrolls to mask the natural plant smell. Others say the scent was just a side effect of storage near incense or dried herbs. Either way, you once tried rubbing lemongrass into a batch. It smelled like a salad. Your overseer was not pleased. You lay out your best sheet and stare at it. This is the part where, if you were a scribe, you'd be sharpening your reed pen, mixing your ink, writing something immortal. But you're not a scribe. You're the person who makes the scroll they use to write about themselves. Still, curiosity wins. You pull out a tiny bottle of leftover ink from under your mat. Your secret stash. It's old. Made from soot and wine and just a bit of crushed beetle. You dab a reed into it and scratch a mark onto the corner of the sheet. Your name, small, messy, and too far in the corner for anyone important to ever notice. But it's there, in your own hand, on your own sheet. Practicing again, Medjay asks, peering over your shoulder. Just testing ink. Looks like a love poem. To myself, he snorts and tosses a half-decent scroll your way. Then you'll need more paper. You catch it and place it gently atop the stack. It's a good day. Not great, but good. The breeze hasn't quit. The sheets have dried. The stack is growing. And in the quiet, with the soft rustle of palm fronds above and the occasional splash of a fish below, you feel just for a second like you've made something real. The kind of thing that lasts, even if no one ever knows your name. The air today feels heavier, not hotter, just fuller, like it's been soaking up too many secrets. The kind of air that presses against your skin without moving, as if the world itself is holding its breath. And for Papyrus, workers like you, that's the worst news of all. You step outside with a finished stack of freshly pressed sheets. Your sandals scuff along the dust-cracked earth, and before you even reach the drying rack, you know, no breeze, not even the pity kind that sneaks past your ear and pretends to help. Just stillness. You glance upward. The sky is that relentless shade of pale gold that promises nothing but sweat. Around you, flies buzz lazily, too slow to land, too stubborn to leave. A heron flaps by low over the Nile, flapping its wings with the urgency of someone trying to escape paperwork. You lay out the sheets one by one on the rack. It's a delicate balance. If they dry too fast, they curl. Too slow, and they mold. Today, they'll sit and sulk, just like you. Medjay appears a few paces behind you, carrying his own stack, noticeably lighter. He's chewing something suspiciously unidentifiable. You hear the wind forecast. He asks, "Let me guess, no, correct?" Also, someone left a scroll in the latrine again. You sigh, "Please don't let it be one of mine." He shrugs. Could have been worse. Could have been poetry. You place the final sheet and take a step back. The rack wobbles, slightly uneven ground but settles. You press both palms to your lower back, stretch, and feel exactly 17 muscles regret your career choices. A mainstream historical fact. Papyrus had to dry flat in a shaded but ventilated area. Too much sun could yellow or warp the fibers. In large workshops, multiple racks were rotated through shaded courtyards, monitored constantly for temperature and humidity. You just hope the gods are in a generous mood. Fringe tidbit. Some believe that whispering to the papyrus while it dried could imbue it with truth, that if you spoke only honesty near it, The resulting scroll would never carry lies. You've tried it once. All it did was make Medjay ask if you were losing your mind. You sit in the shade, fan in hand, facing the racks like a bodyguard assigned to very boring treasure. Medjay joins you, and for a long time, neither of you speaks, because this is what you do on windless days. Wait, fan, hope. Then fan again. You shift your gaze to a drying sheet, watching as a small beetle trundles across it like a scholar with tiny sandals. You lean in and blow gently to chase it off, but it only turns and continues its path apparently with an urgent appointment. You flick it away. The sheet is unharmed. Well, Medjay says, at least it's not raining. It never rains. Exactly. We're the chosen people of dry disappointment. You snort. That would make a great temple hymn. Verse 1. Behold, the breeze is a lie. Verse 2. Let us fan with hope and blistered thighs. You both laugh, and the sound drifts quietly through the reeds. Historians still argue whether papyrus was stored flat or rolled immediately after drying. Some scrolls show early signs of being curled before they were fully cured, while others were stacked under weights for days. What's certain is that either method could go horribly wrong in weather like this. You inspect the nearest sheet, still too damp. The fibers look fine on the surface, but you know better. Underneath, they cling to each other like nervous villagers in a flood. You take your fan and begin the ritual. Slow arcs, one sheet at a time. You hum, almost involuntarily, a low tune your mother used to sing when cooling bread in the shade. You don't even remember the words anymore. Just the rhythm. Medjay imitates you, fanning his sheets with a reed mat and a dramatic flair that suggests he once aspired to stage acting. You say nothing. He's already told you the entire plot of the tragedy of the tax collector's lost sandal 3 times this week. The sun crawls overhead. The flies grow bolder. One lands on your ear and stays there long enough to qualify for citizenship. You swat, miss, swat again, miss worse. Medjay throws a pebble at you. You're losing to a bug. I'm conserving energy by getting bitten. By choosing my battles, the wind never comes. The air stays stubborn, thick with that strange, unspeaking tension like the sky is stewing in something it can't decide to release. You check the sheets again. Still damp, still waiting. But tomorrow, you promise yourself, will be different. You whisper that promise to the papyrus as you fan, just in case. You lift the newest sheet off the drying rack, fingertips brushing its surface like you're checking the pulse of a very thin ghost. It's ready. Not perfect. There's a faint wave along one edge, but no serious warping. It's sun-cured, wind-kissed barely, and firm enough to survive a grumpy priest's elbow. You hold it up to the light, letting it glow faintly gold. It smells surprisingly nice. Not floral, not sweet, just a warm, fibrous scent like if the sun itself had a library. You lay it beside the others, proud. The stack is growing. Some clean, some wrinkled. A few suspiciously shaped like Medjay sat on them again. But this one feels like the start of something. You touch it again and smile. The scent of papyrus isn't something most people would write a poem about, but then again, most people don't spend days hunched over a drying rack wondering if their work will outlive their name. You tilt your head, sniff again. It's sour, but a good kind of sour, like citrus left in a warm jar. Some say that's the smell of truth of fiber that's fully cured and ready to carry the weight of words. A mainstream historical fact. Finished papyrus sheets often carried a distinct aroma due to the plant's natural sugars reacting under the heat. If stored improperly, that same scent would turn acidic, and scribes hated that. Bad-smelling sheets were blamed for poor handwriting, ink smears, and even unlucky deaths. Whether or not it was true, one thing was certain. A good papyrus sheet had to feel right in the hand. A fringe tidbit. There's a story passed around papyrus workers about a high priest who could supposedly identify which month a sheet was made based on its scent. Ah yes, late Farmuthi. He'd say, sniffing deeply, faint notes of goat fur and marital tension. You suspect the man just wanted to sound clever, but now you catch yourself sniffing your own sheets more than necessary. Medjay has started calling you the nose of Memphis. You're not even from Memphis. You sit in the shade, laying sheet after sheet onto the cloth mat, checking for consistency. Some feel thin at the corners, others too thick in the middle. But then you find it a perfect one. Flat, even, slightly warm from the sun. But With that gentle give under your fingers, that means it's ready to write on. You run your palm across it like smoothing a wrinkle from a favorite memory. This sheet is going to the temple, or the palace, or maybe somewhere far beyond. You'll never know. You almost never know. Medjay arrives carrying a half-finished bundle under one arm and a half-eaten onion in the other. He pauses, sniffs the air. Is that success I smell? You lift the sheet. He nods appreciatively. That's a good one. You should sign it. I can't. You can. You just shouldn't. He flops down beside you. Big difference. You set the sheet aside, placing it carefully in the premium stack. No wormholes, no leaf stains, no evidence of Medjay's boots. It might be the finest sheet you've made all month. Historians still argue whether individual papyrus makers had any mark of authorship. Some theorize early stamps or dye patterns were used to signal origin or quality. Others say workers like you were nameless, faceless hands in a long scroll of history. But every time you line up a batch like this, you wonder, maybe someone, somewhere, knew. You reach again for your hidden bottle of ink, still half full, still questionable in scent. You dip a tiny reed in and write, gently, in the bottom corner of the good sheet, a tiny fish, swimming left. It's not a name, not a word, but it's yours. And if some scribe frowns at it later and decides to scratch it out, fine. You'll still know it was there. For a moment, in the silence, in the fiber, Medjay leans over. You know fish swim the other way, right? You don't dignify him with an answer. Instead, you go back to inspecting, one by one. The stack grows, and the smell of fresh scrolls thickens in the air, warm, earthy, weirdly comforting. You get used to it. It settles in your hair, your hands, probably your dreams, too. You imagine someone centuries from now unrolling a scroll, reading about wheat taxes, or a fish shipment, or some noble's complaints about the Nile's punctuality and doing it on your sheet, the one you peeled, mashed, dried, and sniffed. And maybe, just maybe, they'll pause, tilt the scroll towards their nose, and wonder. Ink is a fickle creature. It behaves like it wants to help, like it's your friend, but the moment it hits the papyrus, it either glides like a dream or bleeds like a stabbed melon. And today, it's bleeding. You stare at the jagged smudge near the top of your test sheet, watching as the ink creeps along the fibers like it's drunk. You frown, shake the reed pen, and dip it again. Medjay leans over your shoulder, still using the wine batch. It aged. It's soured. It's got character. It's got legs. I just watched it walk off the sheet. You sigh, set the pen down, and hold the sheet up to the light. The papyrus itself is fine. It's the ink. Always the ink. You shuffle back to your reed hut and unearth the tiny pots you've collected over the years, bits of clay and bone, each filled with failed dreams. Soot ink, charcoal ink, the ill-fated pomegranate batch that smelled amazing but wrote like jam. A mainstream historical fact. Egyptian ink was usually a mix of soot or other carbon-rich materials, gum usually acacia, and water or wine. Sometimes copper compounds were added for red or green hues. It was an art, not a science. Mostly because it never worked exactly the same way twice. Fringe tidbit. Some papyrus makers believed that singing while stirring the ink improved its flow. The right vibration, the right tone, it aligned the ingredients, made the letters dance. The wrong song. Well, that's how you got the scroll of unintelligible curses and one recipe for turnip soup. You pull out your good pot, a small lidded jar made from fired Nile mud. Inside, your best batch of ink, made from soot scraped off the bakery chimney last summer, bound with fig sap and a bit of leftover wine. It smells terrible. This is promising. You dip your reed and try again. A short stroke, thin, controlled. No bleed. You hold your breath. The mark stays put. Success. You run your thumb over it. Dry already. Slight grit. It'll hold. Medjay sits cross-legged across from you, sharpening his own reed pens with a shell knife that's older than both of you. You ever think about being a scribe? No. Why not? You pause, then lie. Too much sitting. Truth is, you think about it all the time. About holding the stylus and shaping prayers, taxes, judgments, about being the hand that gives voice. But you also know the truth. Scribes come from scribe families. They train young, they get tutors. You got swamp rot and a very strong back. You dip again, draw a loop. A symbol, not quite a word, not quite a doodle, maybe a bird, maybe a hat. You're not sure yet. The sheet absorbs it cleanly. Historians still argue whether papyrus sheets were ink-tested at the workshop or only upon arrival at their final destination. Some surviving sheets bear faint scribbles names, prices, idle symbols, while others are pristine. Was that the mark of quality control, boredom, or rebellion? You like to imagine it was all three. Medjay scratches a line into his sheet, then another. His expression is pure concentration. Then suddenly, he draws a crocodile. It has eyebrows, large ones. New logo, he announces. For what? Our future scroll shop. We don't have one. Not with that attitude. You laugh. The ink does not. It's drying beautifully now, sheet after sheet. You test each one, making small marks in the corners. No smears, no smudges. This batch of papyrus wants to be written on. You imagine again someone, somewhere, dipping their pen into fresh black ink and writing a love letter, or a command, or a prayer on your sheet. Maybe they'll notice how smooth it is, how the ink glides. Maybe they'll think of the person behind it, or maybe not. You lay out the sheets on the table, some marked, some blank, all dry. The hut smells like ink and reed fiber and dried sun. Medjay finishes his crocodile and adds a crown. High Priest of the River. Is that his title? No, his vibe. You roll your eyes and begin packing the sheets into scroll form. They don't resist. The papyrus folds easily, rolls neatly, clicks into itself like it remembers how to be useful. You tie them with thin string and lay them in the carrying basket. The ink has set. The fibers are firm. The scrolls are ready. And tomorrow, they'll leave your hands. The fire pit crackles nearby, low and lazy. You stand beside it with a basket full of failure. This is the part no one talks about, the burning. For every perfect scroll that makes its way to the temple or tax house, there are 5 that don't. The warped ones, the wrinkled ones, the ones with ink blotches shaped like shame, the ones a beetle chewed through during the night and left a message that, depending on your mood, might be a divine curse or just hunger. You reach into the basket, pull out a ruined sheet soft, floppy, edges curled like overcooked fish skin, and toss it into the flame. It catches quickly. Papyrus always does. It flares, then folds inward, curling into ash. There's a quiet satisfaction in it. Destruction can be honest. Medjay stands a few feet away, arms crossed, watching another bad batch go up in smoke. That one was mine. He says, I know, it deserved this. A mainstream historical fact. Papyrus was highly flammable, so much so that scroll storage was always a careful endeavor away from open flame, often sealed in clay jars or wooden boxes lined with linen. One spark could erase a generation's worth of law, poetry, or romantic desperation. Historians mourned the loss of the Library of Alexandria for this very reason. One fire, countless scrolls, gone. A fringe tidbit. Some believe that burning a failed sheet of papyrus could cleanse the bad luck clinging to it and to the person who made it. So, papyrus burners often whispered small apologies or offerings to the fire, or just cursed and moved on, depending on how many sheets were involved. You toss another one in. It makes a soft fsh noise as it disappears. Some failures are obvious. Wrinkled corners, ink stains that look like they belong to a squid with tremors, but others, subtle. A bad batch of pulp that's set too soft, a faint ridge. An invisible flaw that only appears when someone tries to write, and the pen snags ruining not only the sheet, but possibly your reputation. You've learned to spot them. Sometimes you burn them anyway, just in case. Medjay pulls out a scroll and holds it up like a sacrificial lamb. What about this one? You look. It's passable. A little wavy, smells faintly of mold. You tilt your head. Give it a second chance. He shrugs. Places it aside, only because the fire pit's full. He's not wrong. The flames are dancing now, high and hungry. You both step back. The smoke drifts upward, carrying the ghost of papyrus into the sky. Somewhere, maybe the gods are reading your mistakes, or maybe they're just enjoying the smell. Historians still argue whether discarded papyrus was always burned. Some suggest it was reused for training, scribble practice, or even latrine duties. Others point to ash deposits in old workshops as evidence of regular burn rituals. Either way, there's something final about fire. You sit beside the pit, basket empty now, arms soot-streaked. The day has cooled slightly enough that the flies have grown sluggish. The sun hangs lower, catching the smoke in long amber ribbons. Medjay tosses in one final sheet, comically small, barely palm-sized. For the beetles, he mutters. You both watch it burn, and then you pack up. The scrolls that passed inspection are tied in neat bundles, ready for delivery. You count them carefully, label them with simple marks, ink dots, thin lines, a flick of your knife for good luck. Each one represents hours, days, sweat, wind, or lack of wind. Small miracles, everyone. You load the bundles into a reed carrier, tie it shut, and sling it over your shoulder. It's heavier than it looks, like carrying paper bricks full of someone else's future. Who's getting these? Medjay asks. You glance at the scroll tops. 3 go to the priests, 2 to the tax office, 1 to the spice merchant, the one who smells like cinnamon and doom. That's the one. Tell him I said his beard is still crooked. You nod solemnly. He'll appreciate that. You walk toward the delivery road, sandals tapping the dirt in a steady rhythm. The scrolls bump gently against your back. Ahead, the path curves toward the town gate stone pillars, chipped and sun-faded, but still standing tall. You won't see where the scrolls end up. You never do. Once they leave your hands, they become documents. Official, anonymous, holy. Sometimes condemning, other times, but you know where they started. In your hands, in the river, in the press, in the wind, and sometimes in the fire. You turn once more to glance back at the smoke still rising from the pit. Then you face forward and walk. The temple guards don't look at you when you arrive. They never do. You nod politely, shifting the reed basket on your back as you pass through the shaded colonnade. Their spears glint in the sunlight, angled just enough to make you wonder what kind of scribbles they'd leave behind if given a scroll and some wine. Inside, the temple courtyard breathes coolness, not kindness. Mind you, just the kind of climate that says, you may exist here if you behave. The air smells of old stone, incense, dried offerings, and the faintest trace of goat. You step quietly, sandals brushing the smoothed limestone floor. Careful not to scuff, you reach the storage chamber, where a scribe in spotless linen awaits. His head is shaved, his eyebrows precise, and his posture sharp enough to file a knife. His name is Senmut, and you've delivered to him before. He does not like you. Scrolls, you say, lifting the basket with both hands. He does not respond, just gestures towards the table low, wide, and lined with cushions no one actually uses. You set the bundle down gently, untie it, and lay the scrolls in 2 neat rows. He inspects them one by one. You stand still, hands behind your back, eyes focused on a point just above his bald spot. The room is silent except for the sound of fingers brushing papyrus, a mainstream historical fact. Temples were among the largest consumers of papyrus in ancient Egypt, not just for rituals and hymns, but for inventories, property records, donations, lunar calendars, and inter-priest gossip disguised as divine messages. They demanded high quality and were not shy about rejecting sheets that didn't meet their standards. Fringe tidbit. Some priests claimed they could feel the aura of a papyrus scroll sense its moral alignment based on texture, weight, and how well it rolled. One even refused to touch any scroll made on a Thursday. Thursday fibers, he said ominously, invite chaos. You hope Senmut isn't one of those. He picks up one scroll, inspects the grain, then raises a single eyebrow, warped. It dried on a still day. You say calmly. He sniffs. A skilled maker adjusts for that. You say nothing. He sets it aside. Another. This one's too soft. It's intended for double-layer inscription. He hums through his nose, the universal sound of fine. But I don't like you. Medjay once described Senmut as a man who files his soul each morning and polishes his pride before bed. You thought it was harsh. Now you think it might have been generous. Still, he approves most of the scrolls. Carefully, reluctantly, but he nods. This batch will do, he says, as if bestowing a minor blessing. You bow your head slightly. Payment. He produces a small clay seal and presses it into the wax tag on your receipt scroll. Your proof to the overseer that your work was accepted. No coin. Not yet. You'll receive your copper weight later. If the gods are generous or bored, you pick up the empty basket. The scrolls are no longer yours. They belong to the temple now, to the priests, to the gods, to paperwork. As you turn to leave, you hear him murmur, just loud enough. I can always tell who the scribes are and who just delivers. You stop, just for a breath, then keep walking. Historians still argue whether papyrus makers were respected members of society or treated as disposable labor. The records are ambiguous. Temple accounts list them by role but rarely by name. Some were paid well, others barely enough to feed a donkey. But every major figure in Egyptian history, every edict, ritual, and record was built on papyrus someone else made. You pass through the courtyard again, into the sun's wide arms. Your shoulders ache. Your mouth is dry. You haven't eaten since sunrise, but your hands are clean. The same hands that cut the reeds, beat the mash, pressed the sheets, burned the failures, tested the ink. Hands that will, tomorrow, do it all again. You glance over your shoulder once, Senmut is gone. The scrolls remain. You wonder if, when he unrolls them later, he'll notice the fine crosshatch, the smooth texture, the clean edge you trimmed with your best knife. Probably not. But maybe, just maybe, the scribe quarters are always louder than you expect. You walk past their courtyard on the way back from the temple, your basket light, your legs heavier than usual, and the sound hits you like a swarm of educated bees. Arguments, laughter, the scrape of styluses on slate, the occasional yell of triumph or horror depending on whether someone successfully drew a baboon god or accidentally smeared ink on a royal decree. You pause in the alley beside the wall, not eavesdropping. Exactly, just listening. Inside, they sit on cushions, shaded by woven canopies, reed pens tucked behind ears, sandals discarded as if knowledge gave them the right to air out their toes in public. Their robes are white, cleaner than your... Their fingers are stained with ink, not sap. Their calluses are from writing, not riverbank hauling. One of them, young, loud, confident, reads aloud from a scroll, a legal dispute over cattle. He's doing voices. Everyone laughs. You smile, a little, then move to leave. Hey, someone calls behind you. A female voice, sharp, familiar. You turn. It's Jeru, scribe in training, sharp eyes, sharper tongue, and somehow always exactly where you don't expect her to be. You dropping off scrolls or just stalking literacy again? She asks, arms crossed, amusement twitching at the corners of her mouth. Scrolls. You reply, good ones, mostly. She grins. We got one yesterday that smelled like fermented beetle. Yours? No. Mages. A mainstream historical fact. Scribes in Egypt were considered elite. Their training began young, often under priest supervision. They learned to write hieratic and hieroglyphic scripts, memorized legal codes, practiced endless lists, and copied scrolls until they could do it in their sleep. Most came from scribe families. Few entered from outside. A fringe tidbit. It said that some scrolls were cursed by jealous scribes. Not obvious hexes, but subtle miswritten glyphs tucked into margins, quietly ruining whatever spell or contract the scroll was meant to carry. A crooked feather here, an inverted sun there. Petty, absolutely, but surprisingly common. Jeru steps closer. Want to see how your sheet's holding up? You blink. You used one already. She waves you over. Come on, I haven't ruined it yet. You follows her into the courtyard, self-conscious now of the dirt on your sleeves, the smell of fiber clinging to your skin. The other scribes glance up, then quickly return to their argument something about the correct abbreviation for goat herder's assistant. Jeru leads you to a low desk. One sheet lies flat. Your sheet. You recognize the edges, the slight grain in the corner, the place where the fiber dipped just barely to the left like it sighed before being pressed. On it, crisp black ink, gliding in smooth, steady lines, elegant glyphs, not yet complete, but already forming a clean legal petition. You don't touch it. You see, she says, not bad. Not bad? She shrugs. All right. Good. It's better than half of what we get. No ink bleed, no texture wobble. Smells like dry honesty. You smile despite yourself. Still not writing on your own? She asks, quieter now. No time. No teachers, no invitations. She picks up a spare stylus and holds it out. You hesitate, then sit beside her, take it, and copy the last glyph she wrote slowly, carefully, as if the ink might catch fire from your inexperience. It doesn't. It flows. Your hand remembers more than you thought it would. You were always watching, she says. Didn't think you were paying attention. I'm not just a delivery boy. Could have fooled Senmut. You both laugh. Historians still argue whether papyrus workers ever became scribes. There are isolated cases, one or two names scratched in margins, signed differently each time, perhaps to hide their origins. But no clear path, no school, no scroll that says, you're allowed now. You finish the glyph. Not perfect, but honest. Jeru looks it over. Still need practice. I know. She hands you a blank scrap, one of the flawed cuttings, too small for full scrolls. Take this. Try again tomorrow. You slip it into your sleeve. Then stand. Then walk out of the courtyard. Head a little higher than before. The sun is lower now, flattening itself along the rooftops, casting long shadows that stretch like tired limbs across the mud brick alleys. You walk slowly through the market. Read scrolls no longer in your basket, just a scrap of practice parchment tucked inside your tunic. You're not headed home. Not yet. Because today's scrolls weren't just for temples and priests. One bundle was for trade. You turn down a narrow road toward the docks, where the scent of salt and spices mingles with fish and sweat and arguments. The river glows orange in the dying light, and boats bob lazily, their sails slack, their cargo waiting for tomorrow's wind. At the end of the dock sits a merchant booth, more of a stall. Really, covered in layered cloth and protected by exactly one crabby servant with a habit of pointing out that you never look like someone who can afford anything. You step up anyway, basket light, mind heavy. A Phoenician trade rep is arguing with a spice dealer over the price of cinnamon that smells suspiciously like roasted onion. You wait, arms crossed, until the trade rep finishes his speech with an elegant hand wave that might mean fine. I'll pay. Or may Horus drop birds on your linen. Your turn. You unroll the scroll bundle. 6 sheets, rolled and marked with shipping glyphs. Papyrus headed west to Byblos, maybe Cyprus, maybe farther. A mainstream historical fact. Egyptian papyrus was a prized export. It reached the Mediterranean, wrapped in bundles, sold to traders who spoke no Egyptian but knew the feel of quality. Some sheets ended up in Greek hands, others in Roman scrolls. One batch even made it to Assyria, where scribes tried to stretch it like leather and tore it instantly. Fringe tidbit. There's a story that one Phoenician merchant paid double for a bundle that had river sole in its scent. Supposedly, he believed those scrolls could hold prophecies. In reality, they had just been dried during a fish spill upstream. You hand over the scrolls. The trade rep, tall, bronze-skinned, wearing a ridiculous number of beads for someone so sunburnt, unrolls one and sniffs. Good weight, he says in broken Egyptian, river-grown. You reply, simply, he nods, as if that explains everything. You receive your seal of trade, a tiny clay stamp on a receipt scroll, marked with a fish, a date palm, and a looping glyph that means something between approved and do not blame me if it gets wet. The scrolls are no longer yours. Again, but they'll travel, and the idea of that is strange, because it means someone, somewhere, far away, might be reading on a sheet you peeled in the morning sun. They might be writing poetry, or contracts, or a shopping list, or a goodbye. You step back from the stall, as the rep bundles the scrolls with others, some from different workshops, others stamped by competitors you've never met. One of the bundles drops and lands in a puddle. The crabby servant hisses like a cat and retrieves it with a cloth. You wince. You know that sheet. You pressed that sheet. But you say nothing. You've learned when to let go. Magi once said, papyrus is like children. You raise them, you shape them, and then someone else decides what they're good for. You didn't disagree. You just hoped they wouldn't be used to line a grain jar. Historians still argue whether papyrus was standardized for trade. Some workshops marked bundles with glyphs indicating sheet size, press method, or drying technique. Others didn't. Trade records show wildly inconsistent quality, and arguments in port cities about mud-textured scrolls or fibers that snapped like twigs. Egyptian papyrus was revered. Yes, but not always consistent. You take a last look at the bundles as they're loaded into a boat. No labels, no names, no signatures, just long, pale scrolls in reed-wrapped rolls, heading across the river. Then the sea, then history. Maybe someone will notice how smooth one feels, maybe not. But they'll use it. They'll write on it. And for you, that's enough. You return home late. The sky bruised purple. The last of the sun curled up behind the date palms like a cat refusing to rise again. Your arms ache. Your basket is empty. Your tunic smells like ink and swamp and pride. You've done your day's work, but before you can collapse onto your mat and forget you exist, a knock sounds at your door. 3 quick taps. Then 2. Then a dramatic pause, followed by one overly theatrical knock you recognize instantly. You open the door. It's Medjay. Of course, holding what appears to be a scroll, wrapped in string and marked with ash. Is that one of mine? You ask. He grins. One of yours, and possibly possessed. You take it. Unroll it carefully. The papyrus is uneven, slightly warped. Ink symbols drawn in strange angles, half hieroglyph, half guess. You squint. Is this a spell scroll? Medjay says proudly. For protection. Against what? Critics. You stare. It's not for me. He adds quickly. It's for my cousin's neighbor's wife's cousin. She says someone's been cursing her goats. You raise an eyebrow. Goats. Bald spots. No milk. One of them started singing. You don't ask further. A mainstream historical fact. Papyrus wasn't just for mundane things like taxes and inventory. It also carried spells, curses, charms, love incantations, and funeral texts. Some of the oldest magic spells ever written are on papyrus inked carefully, recited softly, folded and worn like armor against bad dreams and bureaucrats alike. Fringe tidbit. In one village, a scroll was buried under the floor of a house to ward off death. It worked. Sort of. The owner lived to be 90, but forgot everyone's name, including his own. His children blamed the memory thief spell and promptly burned every papyrus in the home. The house, however, still stands. You run your finger over Medjay's spell scroll. The papyrus itself isn't your best work, but it's holding. The ink hasn't cracked. The glyphs are crooked but legible. This one's not enchanted. You say. He grins. It will be. I just need your help. With what? Making it feel magical. You sigh. But you don't say no. Instead, you reach into your reed box, pull out the oil pot, and lightly rub the edges of the scroll with a thin layer of perfumed resin. Not much, just enough to make it smell mysterious. Then you wrap it again, tie it with frayed red thread, and sprinkle a pinch of powdered dried lotus on top. It clings to the fibers like golden dust. Medjay whistles. Now that's got soul. You're not seriously charging her for this, are you? I'm charging her cousin's neighbor's wife's brother. Ah, so the con is layered. He bows. You hand the scroll back. Tell her to burn it at sunrise, and not to feed the singing goat past dusk. Why? No reason. Just sounds important. He grins, then turns to leave. You watch him disappear down the alley, scroll in hand, humming the goat song again. You close the door and finally sit. Historians still argue whether magical papyrus was viewed as real protection or just superstition layered in poetry. But the scrolls remain tucked into tombs, rolled behind statues, folded under beds. Some written in careful script, others scribbled in haste. And always, with the belief that words held power. You pull out your little practice sheet, what's left of it, and draw a single symbol in the middle. A knot. No spell. No meaning. Just something that feels true. You fold it and place it under your mat. Not for luck, not for gods, just for you. Tomorrow, you'll make more scrolls. Some for temples, some for taxes, and some, maybe, to keep the goats singing. Dusk slides into evening with barely a sound. The sky fades from bruise to soot, and the last boat on the Nile glides past like a whisper, its sail catching starlight instead of wind. You sit outside, alone, legs stretched, elbows resting on your knees, listening to the soft rustle of reeds. There's no fire tonight, just the quiet. The kind of quiet that presses gently against your chest. Not to crush, but to remind you that yes, you're still here. Your hands still smell faintly of fiber and ink. The final sheet of the day rests beside you, not bundled, not rolled, just there, flat, unmarked, catching moonlight across its surface like it's waiting for something or someone. You lift it, feel its weight light but not empty. You lay it across your knees and run your palm along it, slow and steady. This one won't go to the temple, or the market, or Medjay's cursed cousin's goat handler. It won't travel across the sea or end up rolled into a funeral charm. This one's just for you. You reach for your stylus, dip it in the last of your soot and fig ink, and pause. No spell, no contract, no false modesty. You begin writing. Your name, your real one. The one nobody carves into temple walls or stamps onto scrolls, letter by letter. The strokes are uneven. The reed splinters slightly. One curve goes too far, loops too wide. But it's yours. A mainstream historical fact. Some ancient papyrus scrolls contain tiny marginal notes. Practice signatures, stray marks, half-formed thoughts. Scholars used to call them accidents. Now, they wonder if they were acts of defiance, or maybe just reminders that someone was there. Fringe tidbit. One scroll, found folded beneath a collapsed worker's hut, held nothing but the words, "I am still learning." No name, no date. Just that, neatly inked in the center of the sheet. It's in a museum now. No one knows who wrote it, but they remember it. You finish your name. You don't decorate it. You don't underline it. You fold the sheet slowly, carefully, no creases. Then you slide it into the reed box with your tools, not for anyone else. Not for payment, just for the record, just for memory. Historians still argue whether papyrus makers ever left behind anything personal, but you've decided. You will, you stand, stretch. Listen, the frogs are louder tonight. The wind hums, barely, brushing past the reeds like it finally remembered you were waiting. Tomorrow, the work begins again. But tonight, you've written your name, and that, for now, is enough. The night grows deeper. The stars blink lazily overhead, their reflections scattered across the slow surface of the Nile. A breeze curls through the reed beds, soft and unhurried, as if even the air has settled into sleep. You sit on the threshold of your hut, eyes half closed, watching moonlight drape itself across the landscape like silk. Every sound is softened now. The croak of frogs, the chirp of crickets, the distant splash of a nightbird. Each one stretched into a lullaby by the quiet of the dark. Your hands rest in your lap. The ink has dried on your fingertips. The tools are tucked away. The scrolls are gone. Carried off to temples, markets, and ships you will never sail. But something of you remains in every line pressed, every fiber trimmed, every scroll tied and passed from hand to hand. The world is smaller now, as if drawn close to whisper, "You've done enough today." You breathe in the warmth of dust and night. You exhale the worry of windless afternoons, and slowly, your thoughts begin to drift not away from Egypt, not away from the reeds or the scrolls, but inward, toward stillness, toward rest. Tomorrow, the river will rise, the stalks will bend, the knives will scrape, and your hands will begin again. But tonight, you've left your mark. Quiet, simple, lasting. Let it hold you now, like a finished scroll in warm hands. Let the night wrap itself around you like linen, and sleep.